Welcome to the Filmtrepreneur podcast, episode number 46. The scariest moment is always just before you start. Stephen King.
This is the Filmtrepreneur podcast, where we teach you the top strategies, tactics, and growth hacks that every indie filmmaker needs to know to make money with their films. We are the podcast that puts the business back into show business. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome to another episode of the Filmtrepreneur podcast. I am your humble and quarantined host, Alex Ferrari. Today's show is sponsored by Rise of the Filmtrepreneur, how to turn your independent film into a profitable business. It's harder today than ever before for independent filmmakers to make money with their films. From predatory film distributors ripping them off to huckster film aggregators who prey upon them, the odds are stacked against the indie filmmaker. The old distribution model of making money with your film is broken, and there needs to be a change. The future of independent filmmaking is the entrepreneurial filmmaker or the filmtrepreneur. In Rise of the Filmtrepreneur, I break down how to actually make money with your film projects and show you how to turn your indie film into a profitable business. With case studies examining successes and failures, this book shows you the step-by-step method to turn your passion into a profitable career. If you're making a feature film, series, or any other kind of video content, the Filmtrepreneur method will set you up for success. The book is available in paperback, ebook, and of course, audiobook. If you want to order it, just head over to www.filmbizbook.com. That's filmbizbook.com. Before we get started, guys, I set up a special link to help people affected by the coronavirus, and you can donate to Feed America. There is a lot of people in need out there, and Feed America is a great organization, and they're helping millions of people on a daily basis, and they also need your help. If you want to donate even $5, $10, it goes a long way. Head over to indiefilmhustle.com/help. Now, before we get started, guys, this episode was first broadcast on the Indie Film Hustle podcast. And I wanted to rebroadcast it here for the Filmtrepreneur tribe because the information on it is so valuable in regarding self-distribution versus traditional distribution and all the myths that are surrounding each one. Now, one thing you might hear in this episode might be references to companies like Distribber or Tug. And obviously, both those companies have gone under and have hurt many filmmakers along the way. So if you hear their names, just replace them in your mind with film aggregator, a general film aggregator or company that does the services they do. The concepts that I talk about in this episode still ring very true. Just because they use Distribber doesn't mean that they couldn't have used another film aggregator to achieve the same success. So a lot of the case studies I'll talk about in this episode kind of go through that. Now, over the years, I've been talking a lot about self-distribution and the power to the people, but I've also talked a lot about traditional distribution. And I think there's a lot of misinformation about both ways of getting your movie out there. So this episode, I wanted to talk about self-distribution, the pluses and the minuses, and traditional distribution, the plus and the minuses, so we could get really clear about both ways of getting your movie out there. So let's define self-distribution. Self-distribution means when you are going to put your movie out there to the platforms yourself. Now, that could be doing your own theatrical release or doing forewalling where you actually rent out a theater and put your movie there, which I don't recommend you do. But that's a form of self-distribution. You can go through a film aggregator to get your film on iTunes, on Amazon, on Google Play, and pitch to Netflix and Hulu and all those platforms online and do SVOD, TVOD, and AVOD, which are subscription video on demand, transactional video on demand, and advertising video on demand. And that basically is the definition of self-distribution. Now, I want to do a little bit of plus and minuses. Now, on the plus side with self-distribution, you will have almost all your money back. You control your movie first and foremost. You control your movie. You are the captain of your ship. You move it however you want to do it. So you're complete control. You pay an aggregator upfront fee and you put your movie on these platforms. After that, whatever the money that comes back from those platforms is 100% yours, minus whatever the platform deducts. Like iTunes takes 30% and Amazon takes whatever percentage out of what they rent or sell on their platforms. And that sounds fantastic. You're like, wow, this is great. Why wouldn't I go to self-distribution? Why would I want to go to a traditional distributor where they're going to take a bunch of money and I'm not going to control my movie and it's going to be locked up for years and blah, 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 blah. That's great. Now, in theory, that self-distribution model works wonderfully. Now, with my first movie, This Is Meg, as you guys all know who've been listening to me for a while, I went through the self-distribution route. Now, I used a film aggregator to submit my film through the platforms and submitted my film to Hulu, which got sold, and not through their AVOD service. This is a straight licensing deal for my first film, This Is Meg. I also was able to get it up on iTunes, on Fandango, on Sony PlayStation, on Xbox, on Google Play, everywhere that you can get a movie to be watched. They pretty much put it up there for me. And I was able to make a good amount of money from that. I was easily able to be a profitable film. Mind you, my budget was extremely low, but I was able to make a profit on my film. Now, a couple of negatives here on self-distribution. If you are going to self-distribute a movie, you've got to look at the ROI, the return on investment. So let's say you have a $150,000 feature film with no stars attached, no stars in it at all, just maybe some faces of people that I might recognize, like I did with This Is Meg. And you go down the self-distribution route. Well, I'm going to tell you from my experience and also from a lot of filmmakers and people I've talked to in the industry, getting $150,000, just getting it back through self-distribution is extremely difficult. It's not impossible. I'm going to give you examples of people who've done it and why those people succeeded. If you're going to make a broad comedy, let's say, and try to penetrate the people who like broad comedies, and you're going to try to market to those people, you will not be able to penetrate that marketplace. It is too broad, and you're now stepping in the arena of what a studio would do and spend millions of dollars to get awareness of your film and see if you can get a return or ROI on that investment. It's extremely difficult. Is it impossible? No. Anything I say here, there's always an exception to the rule. I'm talking about most of the situations when it comes to getting your film out there. If you are going to self-distribute, you absolutely must, and I can't express this enough, need to understand marketing. You need to understand social media marketing. You need to understand internet marketing. You need to understand how to get to your core audience. And if you don't know that or have someone who you hire that knows how to do that, which are rare, to tell you the truth. I've only met a handful of people who can actually do what they say they're going to do in the internet marketing space. It is going to be almost impossible for you to recoup that kind of budget going through the self-distribution route. It's just very, very, very difficult. Now, if you are going to try to do self-distribution and want to be successful, the two things that you need to have for self-distribution to be a success is a niche of a movie. So when I say a niche, meaning I'll give an example like Faith Granger, who was a guest a few podcast episodes ago, where she made a movie about hot rods. That market, she knew that market very well. She knew how to market to that audience very well, and she did so. It's a small audience, but it was a dense audience, and she was able to just target those people because they wanted to see a movie about hot rods because there was nothing else in the marketplace doing that. So that's why she was able to make a ton of money and actually turn that little movie into almost a career. She just goes around touring all around the country, showing her movie, screening her movie at different festivals. And she built another company around that audience base. And now she's hopefully going to be doing more films in the future and doing other things as well. But that makes sense. That makes absolute sense. Or if you don't have a niche audience, you have a built-in audience, meaning that the topic of your film is going to appeal to a built-in audience that's waiting and ready for your product. So there was a movie called Asperger's Are Us by a great director. His name's Alex Lehman, who was on the show many eons ago with his movie that he directed with Mark Duplass and Sarah Paulson. And he did a documentary about an autistic comedy troupe. And that movie has a built-in audience, people who are interested in the subject matter of autism and how people deal with autism and move forward with autism. And it was a very unique story. And they were able to penetrate the marketplace literally just by posting in a handful of Facebook groups, targeting a handful of people who are interested in that topic. And the movie went out and made gangbusters. It did a lot of money. Even Netflix bought it afterwards because of the subject matter. So it had a built-in audience. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, the big streaming platforms. There's a lot of misinformation about Netflix specifically, but Hulu for that matter as well. But let's talk about Netflix first. People think that, you just submit your movie to Netflix and Netflix is going to pay you $100,000 for your movie, $200,000 for your movie, $50,000 for your movie. Understand that right now, the business model of Netflix is not to acquire or license other product. They are in the business of creating their own original content because that is what is going to be beneficial to them in the long run. They pay once and they have the rights to it forever, and they can continue to use it on their platform. Currently, Netflix has over 700 original programs and movies in their library, and they're spending $8 billion this year alone on original content. So they do license stuff, obviously. They still bring on big movies. They still bring in indie films, documentaries specifically, comedy specials, all of that. They still do it, but it's much smaller. The other little secret that people don't say very often is that Netflix has really penetrated the US market. They really control. There's like 110 million people in the US that uses Netflix and growing every day. But they're starting to get to a point where they know that their growth is not going to be in the US. Their growth is going to be worldwide. So if you have content that is specific to the US, that's something that they're not even going to look at. They're looking for content that can translate to other cultures, to other countries, because that's where they want to start growing. The Indias, the Chinas, Europe, South America, all these other places where they're trying to start breaking in and expanding and growing their company. So understand the mentality of what Netflix is trying to do. I'm not saying you don't have to pitch to them. Pitch to them. If you can get to them, great. Pitch. But think like that when you're going in, so you don't go in with weird expectations that Netflix is going to buy something from you right away. Understand that this is their business model. Now, Hulu's a little bit different. They are licensing a bunch of stuff, but they are starting to go towards the Netflix model of creating original content so they can control it. It is a much better business model than licensing other people's product and continuously doing it again and again and again. It's just outputting of money and money and money, where you can output money once and have that content forever on your platform. So know that that's where these big streaming services are going. They are still buying, and I think there'll always be a portion of what they do. They will be licensing and buying from other people, but understand that your competition to get into those services is really, really difficult. Amazon is the exact same way. Now, another negative about self-distribution is the international reach. Yes, if you go through an aggregator, you'll be able to get on iTunes and Amazon, and you'll be able to be put in, let's say 10, 12 different markets around the world. But if you're not marketing in those territories, really doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot. From my experience, when I put my movie out internationally on This Is Meg, most of my money was coming in from the US because that's where most of my followers and listeners are. But I did get some sales, but then I put the movie up on Vimeo Pro, where anybody, no matter what territory they are in the world, could rent it on Vimeo Pro and watch it there. And I did get a handful of sales through Vimeo as well. But overall, I'm not selling my movie internationally. I'm not selling territories like China or the UK or Germany or anything like that. Self-distribution doesn't allow for that yet. It might in the future, but it doesn't right now in 2018. Now, I'm going to discuss a few success stories of self-distribution. First of all, This Is Meg. My film was a success. I was able to definitely make a good amount of money on the film. I'm not retiring off it by any stretch, and I'm still making money on it every month. It's still growing all the time. It was a success, but understand why it was a success. This Is Meg is a dramedy. It's a comedy drama about an actress comedian trying to make it in Hollywood. Now you're saying, Alex, that's not niche. How were you able to be successful? It wasn't niche, but I did have an audience, which is you guys, the Indie Film Hustle tribe, and people who follow me and listen to me. So I was able to bring them along my journey with This Is Meg to the point where when This Is Meg was finally released, everybody was curious on what it looked like, how it made it, what's going on. A lot of people watched it for free on Hulu. A lot of people bought it and rented it to support me and what I do with Indie Film Hustle. But I had an audience that I fed and I understood what they were looking for. So I brought them along with me on the journey. There's also ancillary products that I've created and am going to create in the future in regards of how I made the film, all sorts of different things, that came in from out of just the sale of the movie. But that's why I was successful. I had an audience that I could actually sell something to. If you're a YouTube star and you've got an audience that loves you, you got 2-3 million subscribers and you make a feature film, if you keep the budget to a certain level, you'll probably do very, very well, depending on how rabid your audience base is for you. And I've seen that happen with many movies that had YouTube stars in it. They tapped into their audience. They brought them along on the journey. And it doesn't have to be a specific niche movie that audience is interested in. Their niche is you. So if you have that kind of audience, then you can create product for that audience and continue to rinse and repeat. My God, guess what? You've got a career at that point. But that is a way of doing it, and that's kind of what I did with This Is Meg. Another success story is Range 15. Range 15, Nick from Range 15 was on the show, and it's been one of the most downloaded episodes ever because he was able to make over $3 million with his self-distributed film. Now, that sounds fantastic. It sounds great. But let's dive in a little bit to why he was able to be so successful with his movie. One, he runs a multi-million-dollar t-shirt company that is based around the niche of military, police, firefighters, Coast Guard, those kind of people. And that's their brand. That brand and those people. So they were able to create a YouTube channel where they made a whole bunch of funny videos that were aimed directly at their audience. So they had this built-in audience. They had huge email lists because these people are extremely, that audience is extremely loyal to what they were doing. So they said, hey, let's go make a movie. When they threw up their Kickstarter, they made $1 million in their Kickstarter campaign for the budget of this film. So then they went out and got some stars, some people that they put on them in the movie, as well as people who are from their audience, their niche, people who are famous within the military community, real Purple Heart winners and things like that. And they just completely populated their film with these people. So they were so smart as they were like building a product specifically for the audience that they have been cultivating for the course of 10 years. So of course, when they went out to self-distribute their film, they put it up on iTunes and Amazon and focused all their traffic on those two platforms. And they made a ton. They literally got to the number 2 spot on all of iTunes, which is insane. They were beating out huge studio films. That's how powerful and how smart and how good they were at their marketing and understanding their audience and getting it to it. That is when self-distribution makes absolutely all the sense in the world because they kept all of that money and they continue to get all of that money as that continues. But by the way, they also built out a whole plethora of ancillary products around the movie, which is t-shirts, because that's their business, posters, Blu-rays, signed autographs, different products, all aimed at their customer base. So they must have made millions off of all the other products as well. So it was an extremely smart business decision on what they were doing. Another great success story is the Jake the Snake Roberts documentary. Now, if you guys don't know who Jake the Snake is an OG WWF star. And it was about what happened to this amazing athlete and star of the WWF and how he had fallen on really hard times, living in a trailer somewhere, dealing with drug abuse and alcoholism, and how he was able to come back out of that darkness. And that was what the documentary was about. Now, for people like me who grew up with the WWF, I wanted to see that documentary. I wanted to see what happened to Jake the Snake. that movie had a built-in audience. That audience is anyone who has ever heard of Jake the Snake, anyone who was ever a fan of Jake the Snake or a fan of the WWF. That is a huge audience. And all they did was they did the exact same thing. They self-distributed, they put it up on iTunes and on Amazon, and all they did was like let the community know. They knew where their community was hanging out, and they marketed to that community. And once that came out, it blew up, was the number one documentary on iTunes for a while, and they made millions of dollars off of that film. So you see the pattern here. Either you have your own audience that are fans of you, and you could sell something to them because it's content that they want to see. You either have a built-in audience that is not wrapped around you, but wrapped around what you do, your brand, things like that. Or you have a built-in audience that exists out there and you're just creating product for them. Like I've always said, I always use the same thing, the Vegan Chef movie. If you make a romantic comedy about vegan chef meets a meat eater, all good. Why wouldn't you make, courses on how to make vegan cuisine and all this stuff and target all those huge audiences like vegans and vegetarians and paleo people and people who want to be healthier and all that kind of good stuff. You target an audience and you build content for that audience. It's same thing with faith-based films. It's same thing with children and family films, talking dog movies. Huge, by the way, talking dog movie. You make a talking dog movie, you're going to make money. But all of those kind of products, you just identify a niche and you can go after that niche. I mean, obviously, the ones I just said were a little bit broader, like a talking dog movie or family movies, but faith-based movies, things like that, you can self-distribute. You can be successful in those cases. And one last thing about self-distribution. Generally speaking, when I put out This Is Meg, it's self-distributed in the US and a little bit overseas through distributor. It didn't have a big reach. So I then decided to go with an actual traditional distributor for my international rights. That is still a possibility where they pick up just the international rights and you control domestic rights. And then from that, I was able to sell huge territories like China, like the UK, like South Africa, and many other countries that bought This Is Meg, which I was just shocked about. I didn't even think China. I mean, seriously, China. How is that? I didn't understand. But it did. It happened, and we made money doing that. That's something you can't self-distribute. You don't have those kind of relationships to get to that. So that would kind of bring us right into traditional distributors and distribution companies. So let's define traditional distribution. Traditional distribution means that you as the filmmaker have a product. That product is your film and you go to a distributor. That distributor will either buy your movie or gather the rights to that movie so they can go off and exploit the rights of that movie, depending on the territories that they have, whether it be just the US market or international. They generally just split it up like that. I don't see many distributors cutting up like, oh, I'm just going to take care of over Canada. It does happen. But generally speaking, unless they're a Canadian distributor or something like that, but generally speaking, distributors like to either have worldwide rights so they can exploit everything, including SVOD and all that kind of stuff, or cut it up in like big chunks, really very, very big chunks. Now let's talk about the pluses first on traditional distribution. Some distributors will give you a limited theatrical release. That sounds like magical. Oh my God, my movie's going to be in the theaters. Oh my God, I'm going to be like, the Avengers, but different. No, it's not like that. What they do is they either rent out or have a relationship with a theater chain here in Los Angeles or in New York or in a couple of big cities, and they'll put your movie out for one weekend and just say, boom, it's out there. By doing that, it does a couple of things. One, if any money comes in from it, great. That's a big plus. But it's mostly a marketing ploy. It's mostly so you can get reviewed by big publications in those cities. So if you're in LA and you do a limited theatrical, you're going to more than likely get the LA Times. You're more than likely going to get the Hollywood Reporter and Variety and those kind of big publications, which are really good and helps the cachet of the film. And also by having a limited theatrical release, it adds value to your movie. So now when you go internationally and go, yes, this was a theatrical release in the US, all of a sudden the price of your movie goes up a little bit. It just seems a little bit more because they know how expensive it is to get a movie theatrically played in the US nowadays. So some distributors will do that. Not all. and not all for free, but some of them will do that as part of their marketing expenses, which we'll get to in a minute. Now, traditional distributors have a much farther reach than you can ever have. Now, if you're in the range 15 kind of world, you don't need a large reach because you have a large audience that you can funnel into one platform. But if you're trying to reach a larger audience, especially an international worldwide audience, traditional distributors, if they have those relationships, can do that. Now, one of the reasons you want to work with a distributor is because you're leveraging their relationships. They have spent years, sometimes decades, building relationships with buyers, with companies from all around the world, that they're able to just make a phone call and go, hey, I've got this new movie. How much how much are you willing to offer for China? And the Chinese contact that they have, like, we'll give you 20 grand for China. Great. We'll give you 100 grand for China. Great. And then he calls up the Germany guy and makes a call to the UK guy and then also calls up Netflix because they have a relationship with Netflix or Hulu or Amazon. And they just make those relationships are what you're trying to leverage when working with a traditional distributor. Now, a lot of people put their movie up on Amazon by themselves. Like, oh, you know what? I could just go to Amazon Video Direct and put my own movie up and drive traffic to it and rent it, sell it, or put it up on Prime. Yes, you could. But the only thing is you're going to get into 2 markets now. It used to be 4 markets. Now it's basically the US and the UK. Those are the only markets that Amazon Video Direct really works with now. They used to have Japan and Germany. They might come back, might not. I don't know. But there's 120 territories that Amazon is in, and you will not be ever get into that many territories by yourself or with an aggregator. It's just not possible yet. But some distributors have those relationships where you could put up your movie on Amazon and be automatically in 120 different territories, which means what? Hopefully more money could come in because you have more opportunity for more people to see your work. Now, let's talk about the negatives. Now, traditional distributors have a horrible reputation, just horrible. And for good reason. Because for many, many years, and even up to this day, there are many scam artists. There are many distributors that will literally rape and pillage filmmakers. It is just the way it is. You can look at these contracts, you can look at these agreements, and you're just like, oh my God. So what they do is they take a naive filmmaker, they make them sign a deal for 7 years, for 15 years. They take 30%, sometimes even more, and they basically just own it now for that time. And if they make money for you, great. If they don't, they don't really care. It's part of their library now, and they could do whatever the hell they want with it, with really no say from you. That is a scary, scary, scary proposition. They also are not very transparent. You don't see their reports very often from the bad ones. I'm not talking about the good ones. I'll talk about the good ones in a second. But they're not very transparent. It's kind of like this old boys club where everything is shut down, closed behind closed doors. They don't give you numbers. They don't give you things. Sometimes they do, but a lot of times they have this thing called creative Hollywood accounting. Now, Hollywood accounting, I'll give you a perfect example of what Hollywood accounting is. You know the Oscar-winning movie Forrest Gump that made hundreds of millions of dollars? According to Paramount, it never made its money. It lost money, according to its accountants. And that is complete and total BS, obviously. But that's what Hollywood does. It's an old way of doing business, and it's just entrenched in the culture of distribution companies, especially old school distribution companies. Another way that traditional distributors really just screw you over is huge marketing costs. And this is where the big mistakes happen, where they'll just have an open-ended marketing cost, meaning that no matter how much marketing that they do, it's going to come out of your pay. It's going to come out of your side, period. That's it. So if they say, look, your movie made $150,000, but guess what? It cost us $160,000 to market it. So we're still losing money on this title. Oh, I'm sorry. That's the way it goes. So if you are going to sign a deal with a traditional distributor, you have to put a cap on marketing expenses. Marketing cap expenses are generally anywhere between $20,000 and $30,000 for a normal film. That's generally what they look at, and it's a cap. But understand, if you do sign a deal with a $30,000 cap, there's no way in hell that distribution company is just going to go, oh, we only spent $10,000. Don't worry about the rest. It's going to go right to the top. It's just the way it is. It's the way they're going to deal with things. Another thing you have to be careful of is the terms of an agreement. How long are they going to lock up your movie? If they're not paying you anything up front, there's no reason to go in for 20 years. Sometimes I've seen some distribution contracts like that. Average is between 5 and 7 years for a distribution contract. It's generally enough time for them to be able to exploit the rights for the film, and then the rights revert back to you after that term. Make sure you also, and this is extremely important, that you put a clause in the contract that states if the distribution company goes out of business or is bought out by another company, that the rights revert back to you. Trust me on this. I've heard horror stories of filmmakers who won Sundance, actually. This one filmmaker I'm thinking of, and that distribution company made a deal with them, but then they went bankrupt. And then his film was stuck in arbitration for years. He couldn't get the rights back out for his film. It was a nightmare. So make sure you do that. Honestly, if you can get a contract, some distributors, believe it or not, do a 3-year contract. It's rare, but they do. 5 to 7 is the 7 being the max. No 10s, no 15s, because at that point you're locking your movie up with these people, this company, for the term of the contract. Some distribution companies also have clauses that can help benefit you, as if they don't perform to a certain extent, the rights revert back to you. Those are things that you need to talk to an attorney about, see if you can work into your agreement as well. But be very, very careful about those terms, because it can lock your movie up for many, many years and you'll never see a dime. I'll tell you a horror story of my own where I actually had a compilation of my shorts called Lipstick and Bullets, and it went out to a distributor, and it was signed by a traditional old school distributor who will remain nameless. But it was just such a bad deal that I was able to wiggle my way out of that deal finally. But it was a horrible deal. They owned it for X amount of years. There was they were changing things left and right without any consent, without any consultation, anything. And you know what? If I was making a ton of money, I might have said, all right, cool, no problem. But I wasn't. I didn't make a dime off of that deal. So I was able to finally get my rights back and control my own property again. It was a horrible experience. Now, you must be asking yourself, Alex, what do we do? I mean, you've told us that traditional, it's not that great and it's hard and this and that. Look, there's a bunch of good distribution companies out there. You have to go and look for them. You have to go and find them, because they are available. This is what you have to look for. You have to look for transparency. You've got to look for their marketing expenses. You have to make sure to never pay upfront fees to any distribution company. If a distribution company goes, fine, we'll take your movie on, but it's going to cost you 10 grand. It's going to cost you 5 grand. No, do not do it. It is a trap. It is a scam. Don't do it. If they're taking your movie on, they will incur any cost to finish, to sell your movie. Now, if you haven't made a trailer or something like that, and that is part of their deliverables list, you either provide them a trailer or they're going to charge you for a trailer. That's understandable. If you haven't done closed captioning, and those are part of the deliverables, and you haven't done those, they're going to charge you for them. And I promise you, they're going to charge you more than rev.com, which I recommend highly to do closed captioning, would charge you. So those expenses make sense, because if you don't do it, you can't deliver. And we'll talk about deliverables in a minute as well. Now, another big plus of working with a good traditional distributor is that they go to AFM, they go to Cannes, they go to MIPT, they go to all of the big film markets. This is where people go to sell and buy movies and shows and content, original content. Generally speaking, buyers, from international buyers to domestic buyers, they do not want to deal with individual filmmakers. And it makes perfect sense. Imagine if you're Netflix, would you want to deal with 5,000 filmmakers with 5,000 different movies? No, you would want to deal with 2 or 3 companies that represents all of those films. And you could deal with them on a movie by movie basis. It's not emotional because, us filmmakers, us creatives can get emotional about our products sometimes, about our films, our babies sometimes. So generally speaking, those distributors, those buyers at these markets do not want to deal with individuals. They want to deal with distribution companies, and preferably with distribution companies that they have a relationship with, that they've bought from in the past, that they know they're not going to get screwed on. These kind of relationships are what are built up over time at these markets. This is something that you cannot do by yourself. You do need a traditional distributor, as I did with my international distributor. And because I would have never been able to sell China by myself. I have no relationships there. I have just no way of doing that, but they do because they had those relationships. So I hope you guys have a better understanding of traditional distribution versus self-distribution. And here are my closing thoughts on both. Self-distribution is a perfect model, but not for all films. For some films, for specific films, you need to understand marketing extremely well. You either need to be a niche yourself, a popular person, an audience that you feel that you can sell a product to. You have to either make a movie for a specific kind of niche and target that niche, or you make a movie that has a built-in audience, like Asperger's Are Us or the Vegan Chef movie or something along those lines. It is a great way of getting your movie out there, but it is extremely hard, and you have to keep your expectations in check. Just because you put a movie up on iTunes doesn't mean you'll make a goddamn dime. You need to get that clear unless you market it towards iTunes, unless you push people towards the platform that you're trying to sell or rent your movie. Okay? So please understand that. It's very, very clear. I loved self-distribution. I loved having control all the way through. But then I also had a good time and understanding of the international distribution company that I worked with, where I just got checks and I didn't have to do any work. That was nice. That was extremely nice to be able to do that as well. But again, you have to look for honest distributors. And now for my closing thoughts on traditional distribution, look for an honest and transparent distributor. That is so key. How do you find that, Alex? Well, this is how you do it. When you find a distribution company that you want to work with, go to IMDb and check out the movies that they've represented in the past. Call up those filmmakers, find their contact information, call them up and ask them how it was to work with them and how they were treated and if they actually got paid and if they were transparent. Because I promise you, if you call up a filmmaker that has worked with the distribution company you're looking at, they will tell you the truth. They will be emphatic with you in either one way, shape, or form, whether it be positive or negative. They'll tell you it was the worst experience they ever had or the best experience they've ever had. I've never run into a filmmaker who did not want to talk to me about it. They all want to talk about it. I've been called multiple times from different filmmakers who saw that I had worked with certain distribution companies in the past and wanted to know the truth about them. And I was just extremely candid, extremely raw about my experiences, positive or negative. That is a way to kind of cut through the crap and find a good distributor. Make sure that there are no upfront fees when dealing with a traditional distributor. No upfront fees to take your movie or anything like that. If you, again, have to pay for some of the deliverables that they're asking for, and I'm going to talk about the deliverables in a second, then that's something that might have to come out of pocket, but that's general with any distributor that you go with. Or even self-distributor, you're going to have these deliverables in mind. Now, if you are lucky enough to find a distributor that is willing to give you an upfront minimum guarantee, that's amazing. What that means is they just give you, let's say $10,000 for the rights to your movie because they know they're going to make money on the tail end, but they're giving you an advance. That is kind of like a unicorn. It generally doesn't happen in today's world. You hear about it at festivals and big movies with big stars at Sundance or South by Southwest, or things like that they bought it for $1 million. They bought it $500,000. They bought it $300,000. Amazon one year was just, if you got into Sundance, you got $150,000 right away from Amazon, right? For Amazon streaming rights, just because you were in Sundance. Those deals are there, but they're very rare and don't expect them. But if you can find it and your movie warrants it, Awesome. Now look for a payment schedule and how transparent their reporting is going to be. And you'll find that out by calling those filmmakers who've worked with them in the past. Also look out for ridiculous marketing expenses. Make sure that you have, if there are marketing expenses, which more likely they are, always have them capped. If you have an open-end marketing expense account, like meaning that they can spend as much as they want on marketing, you will never see a dime on your movie. And also check to see what kind of international reach they have if they're going to represent you internationally. A lot of domestic distributors say they have very deep, international connections, but at the end of the day, they might not. So you're going to have to do your due diligence and really figure it out. Do research, IMDb Pro, that has so much information about what movies they represented, where it was sold, and what kind of relationships that company might actually have. So definitely check that out. Now, I want to also talk about deliverables. Deliverables are one of the biggest pains in the asses of this entire process of filmmaking. Now, I'm not talking about just the technical deliverables of making sure your movie's on Apple ProRes 422HQ at 1080p and at 4K if you're going to do 4K, making sure you have surround sound files, all that stuff, M&E tracks, for international, your closed captioning, your subtitling files, your text list, all of that stuff. All the technical stuff is something you're going to need. You're going to need a trailer, a G-rated trailer at that, for the different platforms. Now, these are things that you're going to need, period. Either you go self-distribution or you go with a traditional distributor or a combination of both. It's going to be needed to be done no matter what. The other kind of deliverables you have to deal with are paperwork. Oh, the paperwork. Me and Suzanne Lyons, who's been on the show many times, have discussed deliverables and the paperwork that comes with it. It's such a pain in the butt, but it's something that needs to be done. Things like E&O insurance, title reports, having all your credits written up, cue sheet for your score and music, all the contracts that you signed with your actors, with your cast, with your crew, with locations, all of those things, the copyright, the chain of title, all of it. These are all big pains in the ass, but you have to have all that stuff ready to go. And there is cost involved with some of those, like having E&O insurance. E&O insurance can be costly, but something that most of the times a distributor will pick up and then just charge you for on the back end when money comes in. Generally, they're not going to charge you up front, but each distributor is different, so you have to look into that. I know, guys, making movies is not easy. It's not a fun process all the way through. The creative part is great, but this is the business side of things, and you really need to have either someone who understands all of this, or you need to learn it yourself. And I would suggest you, as a filmmaker, as a director, as a screenwriter, as anyone who's working in the business, understand this process. Because if you don't, you're going to get screwed. You're not going to make any money. And if you don't make any money selling your movie, you're not going to be able to make another movie. And that is horrible. I want you guys to be able to make your movies. I want you to be able to tell your stories and get them out into the world. Like I've always said to so many times on the show before, you never know the impact your art, your film, your screenplay will have on an individual in the world. It's your responsibility to get it out in the world. And I'm going to add to that, it's also your responsibility to get paid for that. Because if not, we can't keep making more movies. It's a very expensive art form, and we need to learn how to create a sustainable business model in order to move forward in our careers. Now, I know a lot of you are asking, Alex, do you know any traditional distributors that are good? Do you know anybody that I can call or recommend that you could call? Well, I'm going to put links to a few distributors that I've personally worked with or had experience with in the show notes. And the show notes are going to be at filmtrepreneur.com/046. And there you'll be able to find links to those companies. And they might be a good match for what you're trying to do with your film. And by the way, I don't get a dime from any of the companies that I recommend, any of the people I recommend, as far as traditional distributors are concerned. Thank you so much for listening, guys. I hope you guys are hanging in there during this quarantine and are educating yourselves and learning and working and hustling within what you can control, whether it be writing your projects, whether it be planning your next project or planning business strategies or creating ancillary product lines or services or thinking like a filmtrepreneur in how you're going to continue your side hustles during this epidemic or this pandemic that we're going through right now. But I hope you guys are hanging in there. Take advantage of this time. I promise you, we will get through this. Safe travels to you and your family, guys. As always, be a filmtrepreneur. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Filmtrepreneur podcast at filmtrepreneur.com.